Now, for more on the ongoing situation in Venezuela, let's hear from a U.S. lawmaker who has been an outspoken critic of the Maduro regime. Chief Washington correspondent Kevin Surley spoke with Republican Senator Marco Rubio earlier today and started by asking about the safety of U.S. diplomats in the country.
We demand that they be treated the way diplomats should be treated all over the world, and that is that their safety be guaranteed by those who have guns and the ability to provide security. And let it be said, and I've said this repeatedly, and the administration's made this clear, if any harm should come to any of our diplomats, the consequences will be swift and they'll be severe. I know this for a fact. It's not for me to make that announcement or to detail what it is, but I'm telling you, if anything were to happen to them, the consequences will be extraordinary.
Should the diplomats leave or should they stay?
No, they should stay. Their job is to represent the United States with the government of Venezuela, and the legitimate government of Venezuela has asked for them to stay. And so they're going to stay, and they're going to be our representatives to them. But if they are in risk, and if any harm should come to them through Maduro, as I said, I'll say it again, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, the consequences will be significant.
Are you satisfied? A lot of people are concerned about this. Are you satisfied right now with what the president is doing, Secretary Pompeo is doing to ensure the safety of these diplomats?
Yeah, they're doing everything we do anywhere else in the world. We have Marines there, we have our embassy security personnel there, and ultimately it's up to the host government and the host country to guarantee their safety. This is an unusual situation where security forces are in the hands of an unfriendly criminal organization. But they would be crazy if they take steps to harm our personnel or in any way make their lives there difficult by cutting off electricity and gas. If any harm comes to these people, they should know, if they don't already, that they will face repercussions they possibly didn't even think were possible.
Juan Guaidó, that's who President Trump has recognized now as the leader of Venezuela. The Maduro regime is holding on. What is going, play this out for me in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Let's be clear, it's not just President Trump. We have 11 Latin American countries, we have France, we have Kosovo, we have Albania. So there's a growing number of countries, more will join today. And the reason why they recognize them is not just because we like them better than Maduro. Venezuela has a constitution. The Constitution says the election that Maduro claims elected him was a fraud. It wasn't constitutional. There's a vacancy. Under the Constitution, when there's a vacancy in the presidency, the National Assembly president assumes it until new elections are called within 45 days. They're following their law. We are going to support them. We're either for democracy or we are not. And if we are, then we've got to put our actions where our mouth is. And that's what we've done. And that's what other countries are willing to do. So this is not a unilateral U.S. position. It is one that's broadly shared in the region and increasingly around the world.
There were massive display of support for this new government in the streets. I mean, really, what happened in the streets, it really hadn't been seen there since 2017, really. But if this escalates to violence, what is the U.S. role going to be as that happens?
Well, I'll only echo what's been said by the administration, and that is, you know, they believe every option is on the table, and depending on what it is we're reacting to. And if Maduro resorts to violence, be it against the National Assembly, be it against President Guaidó, or God forbid our diplomats, the White House and the administration has a response ready. It'll be appropriate to whatever action is taken, and they'll be quite significant. I will tell you that if that happens, Maduro has no future. He has the ability still now to sort of leave his control of the armed forces and find somewhere else to live. That door closes the minute he harms any member of the National Assembly, President Guaidó, and God forbid an American.
Lastly on this, oil sanctions, state sponsor of terror, obviously that will still be on the table, but do we give the new government time to sort through and take power? Well,
the Maduro regime is a state sponsor of terror. Venezuela is now governed by President Guaidó, and he's not a terrorist. Second, on the new government, the interim president's task is not, I think we're ascribing attributes to this, that this is not one guy taking over for another. He is the interim president under the Constitution. He's assumed that role. He's explained this very clearly. His job is, number one, to help with the humanitarian situation. I believe he will ask for international support, and we should be a part of delivering that. Second, he wants to conduct new elections to be called at some point in the next 45 days, so there can be a transition to a legitimately constitutionally elected president. And third, he wants to begin the process of rallying international support for reconstruction of the country. We should be supportive of all of that. But this is not a transition from a Maduro regime to a Guaidó long-term situation. He is the interim president. He has made that very clear, and his job is to help this country transition back to constitutional order.
Senator, you recently were just elected to be chairman of the Senate's Small Business Committee, there was a Reuters report back in November about ZTE's role in Venezuela, and you and your Democratic colleague, Senator Chris Van Hollen, wrote to the administration about ZTE's involvement in Venezuela. ZTE, of course, the China-backed telecommunications firm. Have you heard back from the administration about whether or not ZTE's role in Venezuela has violated sanctions? And as chairman now, you really are making this relationship between national security and the economy, and small businesses in particular, a focus of.
Well, many of our small businesses are negatively impacted by unfair foreign competition, state-sponsored companies that are subsidized who come in and undercut American companies. So we're very concerned about that. On ZTE, I know that Treasury and Commerce and even the State Department are looking at what we have said. But ideally, this will be a non-factor here because there's a new government in Venezuela who will not use ZTE technology the way the Maduro regime was using it.
Yeah. You've also introduced legislation with Senator Mark Warner about creating a new entity within the White House that, again, would work to protect IP, work from foreign entities, really getting into the supply chains of the U.S.
Right.
And stealing intellectual property.
Well, it's more than that's a big concern. But the other is, and if you can sort of inject yourself into the supply chain of U.S. Key infrastructure, for example, a foreign adversary could have the ability in a time of conflict to shut off our power grid or our mass transit systems, use our telecommunication systems against us to spy or to deny us communication. So there's tremendous concern about the components of all of these key infrastructures and what a country whose companies specialize in this would do. And that's why you've seen this effort to look at Huawei and ZTE, and not just in the U.S., but a growing number of countries that are discovering this as well.
And I'm struck by this because just in covering the financial sector here in Washington, D.C. and regulations, I mean, the Small Business Committee up until now really hasn't been as focused. It has in the past, but not as focused on issues of national security. Is that going to be a key focus?
Well, look, the primary responsibility of that committee is to conduct oversight over the Small Business Administration and on the policy front to promote policies that are good for small business. In this global economy, it is inevitable that even small businesses would be impacted by unfair competition or positively by access to markets they didn't have before. So that'll certainly be a part of what we look at, but we're not using it as a mini foreign relations committee. To the extent that national security and foreign policy overlap with what's in the interest of our small business, it'll be a part of our conversation.
Secretary Ross has made some comments today just about that the U.S. and China are, quote unquote, miles and miles away from each other. What would you need, Senator, in terms of a trade agreement to be reached between the U.S. and China to assure you that on the issue of intellectual property, on the issue of things like ZTE, well, look, China's on the same page? First
of all, China has to stop stealing things. They can't steal our intellectual property. They can't force our companies to transfer it. But second is reciprocity. That's what I'm looking. China's not some poor developing country. It is the second largest economy in the world, soon to be the largest, not per capita, but in sheer size given the number of people it has. And we're treating them like there's some third world country that's recovering from 50 years of a depression and poverty. They're not. And so there needs to be reciprocity. I think it's very simple. Whatever conditions our businesses face in China should be the conditions their businesses face here. Whatever conditions are placed on our exports to China should be the conditions we place on their exports here.